In this video, we'll be covering some of the rare magic items that either go against the generally established rules of the game, or provide unique and fun quirks that no other mechanic or item in the game has. These effects can either change how a normal party typically approaches a situation, or just simply feels out of place in a way that most would consider harmless. So with that out of the way, let's get started. Starting us off at number 10, we have the Belt of Dwarven Kind. There are actually two sets of benefits that this item provides, depending on whether or not you are a dwarf or another race. The first set of benefits are universal to everyone and include the following. You gain an increase of your Constitution score by 2, up to a maximum of 20, advantage on Charisma checks using your Persuasion when interacting with other dwarves, and while you're attuned to this magic item, you have a 50% chance at every day of dawn to grow a full beard if you're capable of growing one, or even a thicker beard if you already have one. And the second set of benefits only apply if you're not a dwarf, simply because you already have these benefits to begin with, which are advantage on saving throws against poison, as well as having resistance to poison damage, 60 feet of dark vision, and the ability to read, write, and speak Dwarvish. Right away, this item grants really good, niche benefits for pretty much any character. You get to increase your Constitution score by 2, which grants you an additional +1 modifier, and retroactively increases your hit points as well, making you slightly better taking hits, which is just useful for everyone. You'll also gain dark vision to see dim light as bright light, and darkness as though it were dim light, which works well for characters that lack the traits, such as humans and dragonborns. And while it doesn't always come up that often, taking half damage from poison as well as having a better chance to avoid the effects of being poisoned are just nice to have. As for the benefits that make interacting with dwarves easier, this item excels at doing just that if your party doesn't already have a way to speak with dwarves who are reluctant to talk to you in your party for whatever reasons. So overall, there are no real downsides to this magic item, and there can only really be benefits for someone who wears it. But to address the elephant in the room, the reason this item is strange is because of the added benefit of being able to grow a full beard 50% of the time every day at dawn. This effect doesn't care about your gender or race, so long as your body is physically capable of growing one, which has the unfortunate downside of locking out certain races, like lizard folk and dragonborn, from the benefit which was arguably one of the best effects the item has to offer. But the reason this item only takes number 10 spot on this list is because, while the item itself is really good, the only weird thing about it is the added facial hair, which won't really change or alter interactions for most characters. And while it would make certain characters stand out in a crowd, having a full beard isn't really anything that could be harmful or beneficial to random strangers. At best, you might be able to use the beard to disguise yourself as an old wizard, perhaps, and at worst, you might get a few strange looks every now and then, but that's pretty much the extent of this belt, unlike other items on this list. And at number 9, we have the Blood Stone. This is an attunement item which allows you to track any creature whose blood is an exact match of, or related to, the blood rune used in crafting this item. The creature you're tracking cannot be undead, and when you use your action to track a creature, you can sense the distance and direction of the creature relative to your location. And in order to create the stone, you must first have a diamond worth at least 5,000 gold pieces, and the blood of a creature whose bloodline you wish to track that you will pour into the gem during the Bloodstone's creation process. If the gem is ever destroyed, the blood evaporates and disappears forever. So, if you ever want to track down an entire bloodline of someone who has slighted you or your party members, or want to look for someone's missing relative, then this magic item is perfect for doing just that. You can also give this item as a gift to a blood-related family member as an heirloom to be handed down from one generation to another, so they'll always know where their family is whenever they need them. Or if you're really desperate, you can make a Bloodstone out of the blood of a legendary beast that you've been facing but ran away in order to track it back to its lair very easily without having to worry about finding its trail again. Although you might end up finding one of its children instead if it's a creature that can reproduce. What makes this item weird is mostly due to the fact that there isn't really any other item like this in the game. There are many ways to try and attempt to track various people down, and the effectiveness of this tracking varies greatly between both players and the characters they make. A ranger would definitely be better at tracking beasts and wildlife if they needed to, while a rogue might be able to cover more ground while scrounging for pieces of information through stealth. A paladin might also try their hand at talking to locals about someone you're looking for, and then all of this information is then compiled together to try to find your target. With a Bloodstone, however, as long as you have the means to make this item, you can always find someone who is at least related to whoever you're trying to seek out. While it might not turn out to be a holy grail of tracking specific individuals, you might end up learning more about a person's blood lineage than you like, it's a great plot device that can be used to up the ante in a campaign story by giving the party a stronger sense of direction to where they might be able to go, or how likely to stay in an area before moving on again. In fact, speaking of plot devices, the adventure module this item was introduced in, Storm King's Thunder, actually does use this item as a plot device a couple of times where you have to use it to try and track an NPC. So while the Bloodstone is definitely one of the more unique items in the game, looking at the source of the magic item, it is clear that it was made for the purposes of acting as a story element for the player to have in Storm King's Thunder. But since the description of the item does specify how a Bloodstone can be created, it can be assumed that this item can be crafted outside the campaign module as well, which still makes it eligible for this list, just not as high due to the relevancy of the item in the adventure modules it was introduced in. And at number 8, we have the Ventilating Lungs. This magic item basically just replaces your lungs with artificial ones, causing your original lungs to disappear as a result for as long as you're attuned to this item. These lungs allow you to breathe as you normally would, including while inside of an anti-magic field, and your breathing can't be suppressed by any form of magic. You also have advantage on saving throws to disregard the effects of harmful gases created by the effects of cloud kill, stinking cloud, inhaled poisons, and gaseous breath weapons, so long as your lungs aren't being suppressed by something like an anti-magic field. But the real fun of having the lungs is the ability to, once a day, use your action in order to exhale a gust of wind as if casting the spell with the same name without using any components. Gust of Wind is normally a second level concentration spell and affects creatures within a 60-foot long, 10-foot wide line, and can be maintained for up to 1 minute. Creatures targeted by this spell must pass a strength saving throw at the start of every turn inside the line in order to remain unaffected by the effects or be pushed 15 feet in whatever direction the gust of wind blows. In addition to that, creatures inside the line must spend 2 feet of movement for every 1 foot it moves, one moving closer to you, effectively halving its total movement if they choose to do nothing but move towards you. You can also use your bonus action on each of your turns in order to change the direction the air blows from you, which can be useful when the creatures start moving out of your gust of wind. And as a bit of an extra touch, the spell also disperses gases or vapors, making the air cleaner for your party to breathe in. It also extinguishes unprotected flames, such as torches and candles, while also causing protected flames from things like lanterns to dance wildly, with a 50-50 chance of being extinguished themselves. While pretty niche, the effects of these lungs are extremely good for having both a passive perspective and an active one. Not ever having to worry about anything impeding your ability to breathe is always great, while also having to worry less about spells, breath weapons, and traps harming you is even better. And once a day, you can just cast a second level spell that isn't that bad of a spell, especially if you're playing a character that doesn't like to get swarmed, such as a rogue or a ranged build ranger. You can also use the Gust of Wind spell to knock creatures off of cliffs, and displace creatures into less favorable positions for them while also keeping yourself protected from melee damage due to the impaired movement creatures inside your line would suffer, which doesn't require a saving throw to be made, it just happens. But as good as these lungs are, the reason they're on this list at all, at number 8 no less, is because items that replace an entire body system is an extremely weird concept even for a fantasy setting like Dungeons & Dragons. The moment you attune to these ventilating lungs, your real lungs get replaced and your real lungs just go somewhere that isn't specified. Then, once you unattune to these special lungs, your original lungs magically pop back into your chest as if nothing has happened. And while, yes, you could very easily explain all of this as simply magical stuff, it does bring into question as to whether or not there is a special dimension specifically for magically replaced organs to float around in, forever waiting to be returned to the owner once more. Regardless, as strange as this item is, conceptually, it only takes number 8 spot on this list, because it is easy to handwave the whole replacing your entire respiratory system thing as a work of magic and nothing else. The weirdness mostly comes from just what it does physically more than anything else, essentially. And at number 7, we have the Professor Orb. This is a sentient orb that possesses the personality of a scholar. It has its own alignment, as well as a wisdom and charisma score, which is determined by the DM, usually by looking at the Dungeon Master's Guide for the orb's alignment and rolling a 3d6 for the previously mentioned stats. However, its intelligence will always be 18 no matter what. The orb can also speak, read, and understand 4 languages, also determined by the DM, and can see and hear up to a range of 60 feet. It has no will of its own, and thus will never initiate any sort of conflict with the one who possesses the orb. As for what the orb itself can do, it contains extensive knowledge of 4 narrow academic subjects in which it can make an intelligence check in order to recall any lore from these forms of knowledge, and has a +9 bonus to do so. The orb is also able to cast Mage Hand for the sole purpose of moving itself from one place to another on its own, and nothing else. Now, sentient objects are nothing new or strange in the world of D&D. There are plenty of items that can talk and have wills and personalities of their own. However, what is strange is that compared to other magical items, the Professor Orb possesses a very niche role by being able to provide knowledge in only 4 very specific fields of academic information, while providing basically nothing else besides. Whenever you think of a sentient item, the first thing that comes to mind is usually cursed or magic weapons and armor, which can provide a lot of useful combat utility and power to your party. Items such as the Black Razor, Whelm, or even Wave are amongst some of the more popular magical items you might run into at some point, and for good reason. Let's take a look at Black Razor, for example. It's a great sword which can devour souls, permanently killing creatures it slays by consuming its spirit, as well as alerting you to creatures within 60 feet of you at all times, and grants immunity to being charmed or frightened. The Black Razor can decide to cast a 3rd level spell Haste on you and maintains concentration on it so you don't have to, giving you the ability to cast your own concentration spells, artificially granting you the ability to maintain 2 concentration spells at once. And of course, it being sentient means it has its own list of demands and requirements in order for you to properly maintain use of the Black Razor. A lot of sentient weapons tend to work in similar ways, providing buffs, doing unique things to change how your character functions, etc, etc. So, having a sentient item that can only share knowledge in a very specific academic field is a bit on the unusual side. But that's not to say there isn't a use for the Professor Orb. In fact, Professor Orb can help teach you about subjects you might never have heard of before, or even bestow knowledge about other magical items or powerful spell scrolls for your wizard. The description of this item is vague enough that these 4 subjects can basically be anything as long as it can fit within the confines of the campaign itself. There's even a unique variant of Professor Orb called Professor Scant, which is an orb owned by a named character which has fixed stats and knowledge for 4 very specific fields of expertise as shown in this description. So while the concept of Professor Orb isn't strange on its own, the fact that it sort of strays away from what most sentient items tend to do is what makes number 7 on our list. And at number 6, we have the Bag of Beans. This bag contains 3d4 dry beans that have various effects whenever you plant one into dirt or sand and then water it. The effects are chosen by rolling a d100 and determining the result using the table in the item's description. Alternatively, however, you can dump the beans out of the bag and into the ground, resulting in the beans exploding in a 10-foot radius, engulfing every creature, including yourself, and flammable objects not being worn or carried. This forces a dexterity saving throw with a DC of 15 in order to have the damage taken of the resultant 5d4 fire damage. Using the beans in this way can make for a decent get off me option when surrounded by more creatures than you're able to deal with, albeit at the cost of some of your hit points unless you have a way to either resist or otherwise reduce the damage of the fire you take. But it could be for a great way to quickly end a fight against a bunch of lower CR creatures being treated as minions with fairly low hit points. As for the other effects, these are what truly make this magic item stand out in comparison to others. The beans can summon trents, sprout toadstools, grow fruit trees, an actual pyramid with a sarcophagus and a mummy lord inside of it, or even a giant beanstalk that leads to wherever the DM determines. Obviously, the last one is the entire reason for the Bag of Beans' existence, as the magic item itself is a reference to the story of Jack and the Beanstalk. The description even uses a cloud giant's castle as being one of the possible locations your DM might have the beanstalk lead to. By far, the weirdest effect has to be the ability to grow your own pyramid, complete with a CR15 creature that might prove formidable depending on your level. However, the sarcophagus the mummy lord sleeps in does contain loot, which your DM will determine. So if you happen to sprout an entire pyramid out of nowhere at higher levels, you can just get free treasure out of it. But the fun doesn't stop there either. The effect that happens when you roll an 81 to 90 on the D100, a number of eggs equal to 1d4 plus 3 spring up to deal 10d6 force damage from exploding within a creature that fails their constitution saving throw when consuming it. The DC for this is fairly high at a respectable 20. But if you manage to make this saving throw, the egg increases your lowest ability score by 1 permanently. This is one of the few ways you can gain a permanent stat upgrade fairly early on in the campaign if you're lucky, since rare items usually start showing up during tier 2 levels of play, which consist of characters levels 5 to 10, while items that get permanent stat boosts such as the Tome of Leadership and Influence, along with similar items, tend to be considered very rare and are harder to find until much later on. However, an easy way to abuse these eggs if you happen to have a Chronergy wizard in your party, because they can very easily help a creature succeed a DC 20 save at level 14 by using the Convergent Future feature in order to ignore the die roll a creature within 6 feet of you makes that is an attack roll, ability check, or saving throw, and can instead decide if the number rolled is the minimum needed to succeed or one less than that. So if one of your party members eats one of these eggs and rolls a 1 on their Constitution saving throw, your Chronergy wizard can just decide that they rolled a 20 instead, and thus granted the party their free stat boost. With so many effects that do so many things, it is definitely worthy of being this fairly high on this list simply because there are just so many random effects that can happen that you wouldn't normally expect to happen when you plant a bean, even if it's magical, which is why the Bag of Beans takes number 6 spot on this list. And at number 5, we have the Weird Tank. This is a 10-gallon tank made of blown glass and sculpted bronze that can be worn as a backpack and contains a water weird inside of it. You can use your action while attuned and wearing this tank in order to bring forth the elemental into the battlefield to help fight for you. You can command the water weird telepathically without using any sort of action to do so, and it acts immediately after you in terms of initiative order. You can also use your action to close the tank, but only if you command the water weird to retract back into it since it's bound to the tank while it's immersed. If the water weird is ever killed, the tank must recharge inside an elemental water node for 24 hours before a new water weird is formed and the tank becomes usable again. As for the tank itself, it has an AC of 15, 50 hit points, and is vulnerable to bludgeoning damage, as well as immunity to poison and psychic damage. It is important to take care that the tank does not get shattered and destroyed, as reducing the tank's hit points to 0 results in both the tank and the water weird inside of it being destroyed and lost forever. At first glance, this item seems pretty basic despite its rather peculiar design as an item. You basically summon a water elemental to help fight for you in combat, which isn't exactly uncommon. However, what makes the water weird special is what it can do when it attacks. Firstly, the water weird has a range of 10 feet for its constrict attack. It deals 3d6 plus 3 bludgeoning damage, which isn't terrible for a creature that doesn't require you to do anything special to make it attack your target. However, if the creature it attacks is of medium size or smaller, then the creature is grappled and pulled 5 feet towards the water weird. The grappled creature can attempt to use their action to make a DC 13 strength or dexterity check to break free of the grapple, but if they cannot, then they're restrained until the grapple ends, either by succeeding the check or by drowning, which is the next part of the water weird's constrict attack. The rules for drowning follow the same rules listed for suffocation, which basically states that you can hold your breath for a number of minutes equal to 1 plus your constitution modifier, minimum of 30 seconds. However, after the point is passed, you can only survive a number of rounds equal to your constitution modifier with a minimum of 1 round, after which your hit points automatically reduce to 0 and you die at the start of your turn. Going down this way also prevents you from regaining hit points or being stabilized until you're no longer suffocating. So, against certain encounters, your Water Weird companion can very easily take a creature out of combat by simply drowning it if it's very unlucky or has really low constitution. However, because the amount of time you can hold your breath is in minutes, you are very unlikely to actually drown a creature during combat, as a minute equals 10 rounds, which is more than enough time to outright kill the creature instead. There are some out-of-combat applications you might be able to use the Water Weird's constructability with, such as providing a portable way of allowing your Grung party member to have a way to immerse themselves in water for an hour in order to avoid suffering increased levels of exhaustion due to their water dependency trait, which there is no duration for how long the Water Weird can remain out of its tank. As for why this item takes number 5 spot on this list, just like the other items on this list, it comes with an unconventional way of providing the player with the ability to bring out a creature in terms of design. Usually, magic items to conjure elemental creatures come in the form of a gem or a staff of sorts. The Water Weird also comes with an attack with a very uncommon method of potentially one-shotting creatures. And lastly, the item is called the Weird Tank, which sort of speaks for itself for this list. And at number 4, we have the Bone Counter. This is a +2 mace with the unique effect of generating a single silver piece in your pocket whenever you destroy an undead creature with it. That's actually all it does. Now, getting free money for killing things isn't actually bad at all. You slay undead and you get rich while doing it, so it's effectively a win-win, especially due to the fact that it's a +2 weapon. And in campaigns where there's a heavy focus on undead creatures, then rest assured there will be no shortage of silver pieces to go around. And since 1 gold piece is worth 10 silver pieces, this makes groups of lower tier undead extremely valuable to fight, since it's a quick way to earn a bit of pocket change. While this isn't really the best method to make money, and certainly won't be how you purchase the airship you've been talking about buying since forever ago, it does sort of add up over a long period of time. Unfortunately, if your campaign tends to have less focus on undead creatures, then you might find yourself not very satisfied with the result of your bone counter. The good news, however, is that the most basic items cost very little. So if your party starts struggling financially, or gold is just very scarce in the world, then this weapon can actually help out a lot. For example, 20 ranger has to spend on resupplying themselves. But maybe that's not enough for some people. Maybe you want to see how far you can take the bone counter, so you and your party decide to clear out a bandit camp that's been causing trouble and had to be put down. Once you do, you ask your necromancy wizard to raise all the bodies using as many spell slots as needed to create new undead, which now will be destroyed with your almighty bone counter, giving you a silver piece each time. And for non-humanoids, your necromancer can cast a 5th level spell, Dance Macabre, to animate up to 5 creatures regardless of creature type. Of course, this has the obvious downside of your necromancy party member being short of skeletons and zombies to bombard your enemies with, but is a more consistent way of making use of the money-making feature of this weapon. Of course, it is best to make sure that you set up some kind of system with Necromancer if you want to use their special ability to raise the dead for profit, as they might not appreciate someone taking advantage of their talents so boldly. Either way, this weapon takes number 4 spot on this list mainly because of how niche and specific the effect of the bone counter is, even if it is an extremely simple concept. Luckily, despite the vanity of this weapon, it is still very good on its own, simply due to be a +2 weapon regardless. And at number 3, we have the Docent. This sentient item has a very specific requirement of needing to be attuned by a Warforged. The Docent has 16 intelligence, 14 wisdom and charisma, and can be of any alignment. It sees the world through your senses and can communicate telepathically with you while also being able to read, speak, and understand Common and Giant, as well as an additional 1d4 language determined by your DM. However, it can also learn new ones if it only knows less than 6 languages, but only after hearing or reading for the first time through your senses. The Docent also has a +7 bonus in one of the 4 following skills, which include Arcana, History, Investigation, or Nature, and knows either Detect Evil and Good or Detect Magic, which is determined by d6. These spells don't require any components, and the Docent decides when it feels like casting the spell. Also, whenever your hit points are reduced to 0, the Docent can provide life support by attempting to stabilize you, making a medicine check at a +6 bonus, which can help prevent an untimely death due to unlucky death saves. The main purpose of this magic item is to advise and assist the Warforged that it attunes to. But due to its sentient nature, it can refuse to help you if you end up treating it poorly or have a generally bad relationship with it, which can be a hindrance more than an asset. Especially because of the fact that you have to use one of your 3 attunement slots in order to use the Docent in the first place. But when you're getting along with your sentient sphere friend, it can provide a lot of insight in regards to the investigating of the ruins with ancient texts, or a book from a foreign land that you might need help translating due to the sheer amount of extra languages you can basically learn from the Docent. And being able to cast Detect Evil and Good or even Detect Magic for free can be fairly useful. Detect Evil and Good allows the Docent to detect aberrations, celestials, elementals, fae, fiends, or undead, within 30 feet of it, as well as being able to know of any nearby areas within 30 feet that have been magically consecrated or desecrated. Meanwhile, Detect Magic just allows the docent to sense magic within 30 feet of it and learn of which school of magic is being sensed if you use your action to determine whether or not a visible creature or object is in possession of anything magical via a faint aura resonating from your target. And since these spells are being cast by the docent itself, it uses its own concentration to maintain it, and thus freeing up your own concentration for whatever you might need to use. So, overall, the Docent is a pretty neat and unique magical item that can serve as a translator or stabilizer whenever needed, but can also help investigate and provide knowledge that you might otherwise not be able to discern using your own skills alone. However, what makes this item strange, and take number 3 spot on this list, is the fact that it can only be attuned to one kind of creature, the Warforged. Warforged themselves aren't exactly a common race in some campaigns due to their manufactured nature, which can conflict in certain settings. Because unlike something like the Circlet of Human Perfection, which only requires attunement by a humanoid, the Docent is unique in that it basically serves as a passive upgrade to the singular race that it was meant to use for, so long as you have room to attune to it. And at number 2, we have the Mind Lash. This is a magical whip that deals an extra 2d4 psychic damage to creatures it hits and forces them to make a DC 15 wisdom saving throw, or have disadvantage on intelligence, wisdom, and charisma saves for 1 minute, repeating the wisdom saving throws at the end of each of its turns in order to end the effect early. However, if they fail their first wisdom saving throw against the whip's effect, then the affected creature would now have a much harder time breaking out of it, since they would now have disadvantage powerful. Otherwise, Mind Lash possesses the normal qualities of a regular whip, including having the finesse and reach properties. This item is actually pretty solid, as whips aren't always very powerful in combat, outside of being able to get someone within 10 feet for sneak attacks with a rogue due to their low 1d4 slashing damage. However, being able to deal an extra 2d4 psychic damage while also debuffing your target saving throws is a game changer for a creature that wants to have their hands on this magical weapon. Unfortunately, there is one huge caveat to this weapon, and is the reason why Mind Lash takes number 2 on this list. In order to attune to this weapon, you must be a Mind Flayer. Otherwise, the Mind Lash only works as a normal whip with the normal whip stats. And becoming a Mind Flayer is, well, effectively impossible, as there's no written rules in the game that allows for this to happen specifically. However, there are a couple of ways around this if you are truly determined to wield this weapon. The first way to wield a Mind Lash is by being a 13th level Thief Rogue or a 14th level Artificer, because they gain access to a very unique ability called Use Magical Device and Magical Item Savant, respectively, which allow them to ignore class, race, and level requirements on any magic item they happen to come across. However, outside of that, there are a couple of extremely non-conventional ways to use a Mind Lash, and would most certainly rely on whether or not your DM will even allow you to, despite totally being within the rules of the game, but could cause other conflicts to arise. The first is simply casting Wish on yourself and wishing yourself to become a Mind Flayer, preferably one that won't try to eat your party's brains while they sleep. And the second is casting the 9th level spell, True Polymorph, in order to transform the party member they want to use Mind Lash into a Mind Flayer themselves, then concentrate on the spell for the entire duration. Once this happens, the transformation is permanent until it's dispelled. Creatures transform Polymorph, you'll have access to all but one type of Mind Flayer, since True Polymorph only lets you transform into creatures with the creature who has a challenge rating the same or lower than the target's level. But the strongest Mind Flayer creature that can possibly wield Mind Lash would be the CR9 creature, Ulatharid, as it sports a good amount of hit points at 127, and comes with a whole bunch of pretty strong abilities that also hit hard. In fact, it might not even be worth using Mind Lash as Ulatharid, because simply their tentacles hit so much harder, and you can even grapple and stun enemies upon failing an intelligence saving throw. And unless your DM wants you to use your intelligence modifier instead of strength or dexterity while using the whip, you'll have a much harder time hitting with it simply due to the fact that Mind Flayers tend to have really poor physical stats to make use out of weapons that aren't their own tentacles or otherwise. Outside of these methods, the Thief Rogue is definitely the most viable and is definitely the way to get the most use out of this item while also feeling uniquely powerful, knowing that you're the only one in your party that can use it. Have a Warlock who's also taken the Pact of the Great Older One, and have your Patron be a Great Cthulhu or something. This can allow for some interesting roleplay between you and your Patron, which might result in earning your patron's favor, and maybe even granting you the power to wield the Mind Lash without needing to meet the requirements for attunement. Overall, this magic item is by far the weirdest one on this list simply due to the requirements alone, and how few ways there are to actually reliably use this item in the first place. And at number 1, we have Hook of Fisher's Delight. This is a silver fish hook that has a gold feather attached to it and allows you to fish in any body of water that fills a minimum of a 10-foot cube. After fishing for an hour, uninterrupted, you roll a d6 and catch a magical fish if you roll a 6. The fish is 6 inches long, and the colors and properties are determined randomly by rolling a d20. On a 1 to 10, you catch a fish that's green with copper bands and will feed you for a day, so long as you eat within 24 hours of catching. An 11 to 14 will net you a yellow fish with black stripes that you can knock a creature disappears. A 1518 hooks you a blue fish with white bands that sprouts wings and follows you around while singing a beautiful tune in Aquan before disappearing after 2d4 hours or being killed. It has the Equipper stat block but can breathe air and has flying speed of 30 feet. And on a 19 or 20, you reel a goldfish with silver stripes that not only feeds a creature for a day, but also grants 2d10 temporary hit points as well. The biggest downside of this item is the fact that you can only catch one fish per day. But in order to do that, you must roll a 6 on your d6 every hour that you fish uninterrupted. So, unless you have a lot of downtime, there's a good chance you won't really make use of this magic item simply because of how long it can take you in order to catch something you might actually use. As for the fish themselves, you have a fairly low chance of catching something you might actually end up using in combat, since the green fish only provides nourishment, which isn't usually a problem that comes up often in games that aren't survival based. And the blue fish doesn't really do much except sing. And if you do allow it to attack, it would only do 1 piercing damage, which is hardly worth it. However, being able to throw a fish at a creature in order to knock them prone is both funny and useful, especially since a DC 15 isn't the worst threshold to meet in the world. And 2d10 temporary hit points provides a nice buffer against damage. Out of all the items on this list, the Hook of Fisher's Delight definitely takes the cake for being number 1 on this list because it is borderline useless at what it does, while also being interesting enough to almost want to have it along for no other reason than to pass the time along with fishing anywhere you go that might have a decent body of water, such as a dank cavern. In fact, it might be worth noting this magic item would combo best with the Pole of Angling, which is a 10-foot pole that can convert itself into a fishing pole. Alright, and that's it for the list. Do you know of any neat ways to use some of the items on this list that I may have missed? Have a favorite rare item that you want to talk about, or have any ideas for future top 10 videos? If so, I'd love to hear about them down in the comments below.